All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a really fascinating book called The Calf by Ahmad Al-Hassan. It lays out a very specific and pretty intense theological argument about history, prophecy, and the big challenges that religious communities are facing right now. So, here's how we're going to break it down. The author builds his case in 6 main parts. We'll look at his idea of a world stuck between two evils, then the archetype of arrogance, the big trial of the calf, and how that connects to today. After that, we'll check out what he calls the straight path, and we'll wrap things up with a prophecy and a pretty serious warning. Okay, so first things first. The author kicks things off by diagnosing what he sees as the central crisis in the Islamic world. He basically argues that there's this state of, paralysis that's stopping any real progress. And he uses this really powerful metaphor to describe it. He writes, it's Satan's ultimate desire for the weak Islamic communities to remain immobile between the hammer and the anvil. So, what exactly are this hammer and this anvil he's talking about? Well, according to the author, communities are basically getting crushed between two huge forces. You've got the hammer on one side. That's the external enemy, like what he calls the American tyrant, or if you go back in time, the Pharaoh in the story of Moses. And on the other side, you've got the anvil. And this is the internal problem, the corruption from what he labels dysfunctional clerics, the ones who mislead people from the inside, a lot like the Sumeri did. So to really get a handle on this internal enemy, the anvil, the author says we need to go way back. We have to look at what he presents as the original archetype of arrogance and corruption, the story of Iblis. Okay, and how the author defines Iblis here is absolutely critical. See, in this view, Iblis isn't just some ignorant being. No, he's presented as someone who was knowledgeable, who was a worshiper, but his fall came from something deeper, something more poisonous, envy and arrogance. And this idea that knowledge by itself isn't enough to save you from corruption, that's a core theme we're going to see throughout this whole book. The book then lays out the fall of Iblis in this really clear step-by-step pattern. Step 1. He's commanded to bow down to Adam. Step 2, he flat out refuses, purely out of arrogance, saying, I am better than him. Step 3, he gets kicked out, cursed by God. And step 4, he makes a vow to lead humanity astray until the final appointed day. So what's the big lesson here, according to the author? It's that the story of Iblis is a massive warning. It shows that you can have all the knowledge in the world, you can be the most devoted worshiper, but if you don't have sincere submission to God and to his chosen representatives, well, it all amounts to nothing. All right, so with that foundation of arrogant betrayal in mind, let's see how the author connects it to the main event of the book, the calf. Man, this timeline really shows how fast everything went downhill. So Moses goes up the mountain, right? He's gone for 40 days. While he's away, this figure, the Sumeri, shows up and creates a golden calf. Now, Moses' own brother, Aaron, who was left in charge, he tries to stop it. But the people overwhelm him. They almost kill him. And just like that, they start worshiping the calf. You can just imagine the scene when Moses gets back. And when Moses does return, Aaron's plea is just heartbreaking. He says, "O son of my mother, indeed the people oppressed me and were about to kill me." The author really zooms in on this moment. It's meant to show how even a true, divinely appointed leader can be totally powerless when the people get swept up by someone who's corrupt, but also charismatic. So this leads us to the question, one the author dedicates a lot of ink to. Who was the Sumeri guy, really? Now, this is where it gets really interesting. According to the book, the Sumeri wasn't some random, ignorant outsider. Far from it. He's described as a knowledgeable scholar, an ascetic who had some access to the unseen. He was a respected fighter, a leader. But his fall from grace, it's a mirror image of Iblis's. It all came down to that same toxic mix, arrogance, envy of the real prophets, and a massive ego that put his own desires ahead of God's. Okay, and here's the pivot. This is where the author makes his big move, connecting this ancient story, this archetype of the corrupt insider, straight to our world today. He does this by drawing a direct line, a powerful analogy. On one hand, he talks about historical figures, like someone called Balaam bin Baora. He presents him as a cleric who knew the truth, but chose to support a tyrant because he was envious of Moses. And then he draws a parallel to what he calls modern, dysfunctional Islamic clerics, those who, in his opinion, have totally abandoned their duty to speak out against injustice. They've become, as he puts it, wolves in sheep's clothing. And to really drive this point home, the author brings in a quote that's attributed to Jesus. It says, "The clerics of evil are like a rock that falls on the mouth of a river. The rock does not drink, nor does it allow water to reach the plants." You get the picture, right? The idea is that they just sit there, blocking the flow of true spiritual nourishment for everyone else. So let's be clear about what the author means by a dysfunctional cleric. He gives a very precise definition. It's not just any religious leader he's talking about. It's a scholar who's insincere, who doesn't walk the talk, and, this is the key part, one who actively teaches people to be passive, especially when facing tyranny, basically telling them to abandon their duty to stand up for what's right. All right, so we've seen the diagnosis of the problem, right? The hammer and the anvil. We've seen these repeating archetypes of corruption. So what's the solution? Well, the author then lays out what he claims is the one and only way forward. He calls this solution the straight path. And what is it? In the book's view, it's the pure, correct beliefs and laws that come straight from God himself. But here's the catch. The author argues that this guidance can only come through a very specific, unbroken chain of infallible prophets, messengers, and their hand-picked successors. For him, this divine chain is the only thing that can protect religion from human error and from that corrupting ego we keep talking about. And following this path isn't just a vague idea. It's built on some very specific pillars of belief. According to the text, you have to believe in God, his messengers, and their 12 successors. You have to believe that the 12th of those successors, the Mahdi, is actually alive right now. You have to believe that the right to make religious law belongs only to these infallible figures. And finally, you have a duty to actively prepare for the Mahdi's eventual rise against all the injustice in the world. And this right here, this is really the linchpin of his entire argument. The author states, pretty bluntly, that any religious law, any ruling that doesn't come from one of these infallible successors isn't actually worship of God. Instead, it becomes a form of worshiping the human being who came up with that law. So we're coming to the end of our explainer, and the book itself concludes with a prophecy that the author uses as a final, pretty stark warning. It's meant to tie everything we've talked about together. The book quotes a prophecy that says, "The clerics of that time are the worst under the shade of the sky. From them the test emerged, and to them it will return." So this is presented as a direct prediction about the role of certain religious leaders in the end times, basically framing them as the very source of the great test for humanity. So at the end of the day, the CAF is arguing that all of human history is just this repeating cycle of divine tests, a test of loyalty, from the time of Adam to Moses, all the way to today. And so the final, really challenging question the author leaves you with is this. If you look at the world through this framework, who are the leaders today? And which path are they really walking? The path of humble submission or the path of destructive arrogance?